Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Constein. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center. And today we're going to be talking about the kinds of sources that you might be using and citing if you're writing a market analysis. Now, a market analysis is not just for someone who goes and get a Master of Business Administration. It's also something they're very concerned with if you're running any sort of business, large or small. Where are things going? Is this a good time to spend money? Is it a justified use of money or loaning of money? And all these things might come together and lead you to want to look and find the most current sources available, which are often not, for a task like this, not scholarly journal articles, not published books, which have longer turnaround times, but faster turnaround things, perhaps a press release, perhaps news coverage, perhaps a government report. And we'll talk about all of those and more later. So let's look at things through the lens of BUSA 670's Week 3 Assignment 2, the case assignment, Apple Incorporated Limits to Growth, because we want to understand what this assignment is looking for, and therefore what kinds of or what places you might be going and looking for information. And then we'll look at how to cite some of those. We'll finish with a brief discussion of how to outline and draft papers. So first off, let's go ahead and dive into this assignment. At a glance, we see that this is coming from the strategic decision making, where you absolutely want to know what's the latest and most current things are. And if we look at this as a snapshot, we see it's a paper, 500 to 800 words. So that's roughly 3 to 4 and a little extra change. So let's say 3 and paragraph or so on the 5th page maximum. And we're going to be writing in APA style and answering some questions. So what resources does Apple have that may give it a competitive advantage? How does it use those resources? To evaluate Apple in terms of its human capital, describe its business strategy, summarize the key challenges in this particular case, and in light of that, what would you recommend that the company do? This is a great kind of thought exercise in what you would do in their situation, and also a very important exercise in looking at, hold on, what information would inform this decision? What would sway you one way or another? And it happens you have access not just to the core course readings, but for analysis like this, you could go outside and see, okay, what did they just release? Now, I will tell you that how a strategy might pivot can change very quickly. And so what was true last year is not necessarily this year. All right, so this begins with the preamble. We say using the information from the Apple case and material from your textbook, work to respond to the discussion prompts. So that's giving you two main things. Now, if you're going outside of this, and if we're moving to, say, a portfolio project or a business simulation, then you would be going outside and looking at some more richer, fuller, more current resources. So let's look at what some of those might be. If you're doing a market analysis, we're going to be looking at a couple types of literature, but they're all going to be following this basic formula. Who wrote it? When was it published? What's it called? And how do you find it? And that's true whether we are looking at it for a video, a news article, a press release, government report. It's going to always have these pieces of information. The rare case, not so much with what we're talking about. The rare case where you don't have a clear author, like an anonymous text, then we would not have who wrote it. But that is very much the exception, because if you see something on a website, a corporate website that doesn't have an author listed specifically for it, generally the organization claims authorship, what we call corporate authorship. So that said, if you have a source or more than one source that has the same author and publication year, you'd go ahead and add a -A to each one after you've organized them alphabetically by title within that year. So you have a 2024A, 2024B, 2024C, and that would be true both in the references section and in the parenthetical citations. So now some of the types of sources we might be looking at for news about things relevant to a business might include earning reports, fact sheets, government reports like economic forecasts, press coverage, press releases, shareholder reports, and white papers. Let's look at each of those in turn. So many of these things fall into what we call gray literature, where it's not being peer reviewed. It's not going through the same process as a scholarly journal article or many books are reviewed by a panel of editors and peer reviewers. So gray literature was sometimes spelled with an E, sometimes spelled with an A. Gray literature is a broad set of things where we're saying, oh, this is an important source potentially to refer to, but it's not quite the peer review standard that you're normally thinking of with APA style. Now, if we look in the APA manual, it tells us a little bit more about some of the things and reminds us that, hey, it is following that basic set of questions for who wrote it, when was it published, what's it called, and how do I find it? So that how do I find it, that's the source part of the table, where for things that have a publisher name, you list that. And if you have a DOI or URL, you would include that. Now, as an example, if we look at this page here, we have a number of different government publications, and depending on whether they are numbered in a particular fashion in the title or adjacent to the title, so you can see with the National Cancer Institute entry that there's the NIH publication series numbering. And then you can see that the first one is report titled Strengthening Trans-Tasman Economic Relations, that does not have a number. So we just have the author, that's the Australian Government Productivity Commission and New Zealand Productivity Commission. We have the publication year, 2012, the title, Strengthening Trans-Tasman Economic Relations, and then the URL. And altogether, those things answer the questions: who wrote it, when was it published, what's it called, and how do I find it? Same thing with the next entry for the Canada Council for the Arts. Well, was it published? 2013. What is it called? What we heard, summary of key findings, 2013 Canada Council's Inter-Arts Office Consultation. How do we find it? There's the link. So the what's it called for the National Cancer Institute entry, that contrasts with the rest in that the what's it called includes both the title Facing Forward Life After Cancer Treatment, and it's also called NIH publication number 18-2424. So with that, let's take a look at some more examples. So earnings reports, very important part of market analyses. And so those are usually these days available, published on for a public corporation, the corporation website. Now, we see the title of the institution, the legal title is currently Apple Inc. Like if you went to their SEC filings, it's Apple Inc. with no comma in between. A lot of sources will still write Apple, comma, Inc. because at one point that was the legal name, but it's currently Apple Inc. with no comma, but with the period after INC. So we have, again, who wrote it? Apple Incorporated, Apple Inc. When was it published? 2024. What's it called? Apple Report second quarter results. And then we have the link. Now, sometimes this will be listed with the month and the day, and sometimes it'll be listed on the page itself with just the year, or just the year and the month. And we include that information for press release to the extent that it is available here. Now, looking at how you would cite that, well, if you're referencing the company in the sentence itself of as the author, Apple Inc. parentheses 2024 reported almost 91 billion in second quarter revenue, versus you're not referring squarely to that at the sentence, but you're including the information at the end of the sentence in parentheses. Hey, that's where that information came from, which is the parenthetical citation format at the bottom. Now, a fact sheet, these are produced by many organizations. If it's something with a very long name like Congressional Research Service, you might find yourself introducing an abbreviation or acronym, as we see in the narrative citation example here. So the first time you list the abbreviation in your parenthetical citation or in the parenthetical part of the narrative citation, and thereafter use CRS. Don't put the abbreviation in your reference entry. That is a common mistake that leads people to lose credit. The abbreviations are introduced the first time you cite the source and then used thereafter, but not in the references list itself. Financial filings, another important thing, and in many cases, for regulatory reasons, they're not on the organization's website itself, but they're hosted by a third party. And so you can see here the reference and some sample citation and usage for Apple Incorporated's actual financial filings from last year. Here's an example of the citation for a government report. And you might be looking at this and saying, hold on, it doesn't quite look right. And if that's what you're thinking, that is absolutely correct. So take a moment and look at this and see if you can spot the error. So although this is in some sense part of that, what is it called, the publication number itself and everything encapsulating it, the parentheses, should not be italicized. So let's go ahead and fix that now. There we go, much better looking. And often people, when they are working on a citation and there's something that's not quite right like that, they'll get a gut feeling that the citation, the reference doesn't quite look right. And if that's something where you look at it and you just can't figure out what's going on, you can always contact us at the Writing Center and ask, hey, is this reference or citation format correct? You want to make sure that we can identify the source. So in this case, having that URL is very important for verifying. But we get questions like that all the time. And if that's something you're having trouble with, let us know, reach out, and we can get you some help. Now, press coverage. So this is a source for a lot of news that there's a lot of information that might affect your market analysis. So let's look at a couple of different types of sources. So in this one, which is an article that ran in The Verge, very recent, that actually ran today. So this article here, because there's an individual author assigned, we get that in the first field. Now the question is, with a news article, what do you italicize? And that is a fun question. I say it's a fun question because this is another common source of confusion. Because if you're used to looking at, say, YouTube videos, this may seem correct. But if you don't look at the YouTube video references very often, this probably looks like there's something wrong. And that's because there's an inversion here. What the title is, the what is this called? Apple Intelligence and Better Siri may be coming to iPhones this spring, should be non-italicized. Whereas The Verge, the title of the publication, which is part of the answer of the where do I find it, that is italicized. So let's go ahead and fix that. Much better. So again, when you're citing a news publication, say The Verge, the New York Times, say the LA Times, say the Boston Globe, that publication is going to be italicized. Now that's different from a platform that is not actually producing the content, it is hosting it. And we'll see an example of that shortly. So we'll skip ahead to this YouTube example here. We have CBS News, that's the organization that's producing it as the author. We have the publication year, the month, the day. What's it called? So that is italicized because YouTube is the platform, not the source, not the author. So it's more akin to a publisher rather than the title of the thing itself. And so that's why we have that italicization for YouTube video, whereas the Verge article here, the Verge is italicized because that's the name of the site that is doing the producing, that is doing the publication, not just being the place where it lives, but there's an active editorial thing there. And same thing with NBC News. So this MSNBC News article, we have the individual author attributed, we have the publication year, the month, the day, but because MSNBC News is the news publication, if you will, and not just a platform that anyone can upload to, like YouTube, that's why MSNBC News is italicized here. Now, note that NBC News is italicized, but when it comes to the citations, it's just going to be author year. Occasionally, you will be referring to the news publication to give credence to it, but that's not going to be in the citations. It's going to be in the body of the sentence. So going back to this YouTube video here, CBS News has made their video available on YouTube, but our author remains CBS News. Shareholder reports. This is another source of information that you might look at. And the financial statements themselves probably aren't going to give predictions, but they definitely give results. And so that might be something that you're referring to. White papers, we have many of these when you're looking at industry trends where white papers are often coming out of think tanks and other groups giving predictions about conditions. And you can see that here we're still following that format. Who wrote it? The Department for Business Innovation and Skills. When was it published? 2016. What's it called? Success as a Knowledge Economy, Teaching Excellent Social Mobility and Student Choice. It is a white paper, so it has a special label there. Crown is the publisher, and then we have a URL. All right. So with that, let's finish with a little discussion of how to outline and draft a paper based on these assignment requirements. So I have here a copy of our APA course paper template. So let's go ahead and just grab the assignment instructions and paste them in here to take a look at. Now, we have the basic parameters of what is this going to be doing? Great. And we also have the more specific questions that need to be answered. So also good to have here because you can make sure that you are answering this and that you are getting each in the order that your instructor is expecting you to answer. Well, let's take a look at the references here. So what was it going to look like if you have all those references that we were looking at earlier? Well, first thing we need to do is just get them all in one place. Because if you know these are the sources that you're going to be using, then we can see, is there anything that needs to happen in order for this to be, for us to know what all the sources are, especially if several of them are coming from the same company as in Apple Inc. So we're just going to paste these in here, not worry about the order just yet. And as you add these in, go ahead and think about how you would organize them. Of course, in APA style, citations are alphabetized first by the first author's last name. But we're going to look directly at that question of what do you do if you have more than one source that you're citing with the same name, and it happens to have the same publication year. Almost done. Now, one of the reasons that it's helpful to organize your sources beforehand is that if you start citing things before you know that they're going to be duplicates, then you might have to go in and update citations and figure out, oh, hold on, which one did I mean here? So let's do some quick cleanup here of the formatting. All right, so now we see a number of sources that are all labeled for 2024. So because we've checked that the name of the author, Apple Incorporated, or Apple Inc., and the publication year are the same, next we turn to the title of the source. Remember, we have those 4 questions. Who wrote it? When was it published? what's it called, and where do I find it? And so now we're looking at the what's it called, and we see, okay, Apple Inc. comes before consolidated statements, but Apple Reports here goes before that. So now that we have organized the sources that we're planning on using, we can look at this and say, all right, this is going to be 2024-A, this is going to be 24-B, and this is going to be 24-C, meaning that now that we've assembled these, we can go and when you cite this one, it'll be Apple Inc., comma, 2024-B. This one will be Apple Inc., comma, 2024-A, and so on and so forth. So by doing this early information, we avoid having to go back and retroactively change citations or mixing up which citation is which. Now, looking at this, so we have 500 to 800 words. And so for to take that low end and say, okay, there's maybe a little bit of introduction, but the low end, saying we're going to need at least 100 words or so for each of these items. Some might be a little bit longer, but what will that look like? Well, that's going to be roughly roughly 2 paragraphs each. So when you think about this, we see, all right, so this you might view as being 2 separate questions. They're related, certainly, but if you're having roughly 2 paragraphs per numbered item, then you see, okay, well, 1 paragraph to answer this question, and 1 to answer this one. And then similarly, we can say, okay, this part here is also going to be about 1 paragraph for that part and 1 paragraph for this. And so you can see, okay, it's a sub-question of sorts. Now the strategy, the key challenges, these may not break down the same way, but still knowing that this is going to be roughly 2 paragraphs gives you a starting point for the level of detail that you're going to include and which sources you're going to be citing in which case. Now, in this particular thing, key challenges, business level strategy, that's going to be coming more from the case study in the textbook. But if you were writing something in terms of market analysis and you were looking at, okay, what are the key challenges? And you went ahead and said, okay, well, they reported here their revenue dropped 4% versus the previous year. Yeah, that's a challenge. That's not the kind of direction that shareholders like. And there's certainly a history of shareholders suing Apple. So you can plot out, but let's say you were citing this one here. Okay, so say, all right. And so as you start writing, you're keeping track of the specific source because when you have multiple things from the same author from the same year, it's easy to get them confused. But because we did this sorting earlier, we have the ability to identify that specific source here with exactitude. All right, I think that's all we're going to have time for this evening. So let's just do a recap of what we've talked about so far. So we began with a discussion of the different types of sources you might be looking for when you are writing a market analysis. And then we dove into this assignment to look at what it was asking and how you might incorporate different elements of these sources into writing in such an analysis. And then we talked about the different types of sources and how they all conform, even though there are some variations, to this basic formula of who wrote it, what was it published, what's it called, and how do you find it, the reference. And then the citations are the more simple, who wrote it and what year was it published. Sometimes with a -A, -B, -C, if we have multiple sources from the same year. So We reviewed a number of different sample reference and citation types, and we concluded with a brief discussion about how to start using the assignment instructions to kick off your outlining and drafting process. If you have any questions, please feel free to send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. You can go ahead and check out our website, grab a copy of the APA course paper template you saw me using, and you can always send quick questions to us at, again, onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. If you would like to get more extensive feedback on your writing, go to my.acu.edu. Under academic resources, select online writing center, and then follow the instructions. And we look forward to seeing you at the writing center. Have a good night.